Okay, without further ado, then I'm gonna just start rocking and rolling here. So one of the things that we wanted to do was find out in the beginning, how many of you use utility costs and short-term operational costs to help guide your path for long-term planning? So if you could respond to the poll. My instincts are, and my experience has been when I work with people out in the field, is that many people consider these two things separately. They think about their operational costs in one way and their capital costs in another. And anything that's happening operationally, people don't really consider in terms of long-term planning. And so I just wanted to find out how many people are like I say, considering what's happening in the short term in order to help plan for the long term. Okay, just give you another minute for people to respond and maybe catch up.
Looks like we're getting a lot of yeses in the chat as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fantastic. And it really is fantastic that people do consider those operational costs. One of the things that you'll see in today's webinar, I just want to talk about those operational costs in ways to make sure that you're both managing them and accounting for them, and then hopefully give you some strategies over the course of the next hour where you can include those in your planning. Okay, so I think everybody can see this on the screen. It splits down in about a third and 2/3. So it looks like roughly 2/3 are considering it and maybe a third is not. Okay, so moving on. So today's webinar, what I want to do is go through a series of a number of things. Start out by talking about the challenges of developing facility plans. What's pretty common that most people run into, just want to make sure we're on the same page and why I think there's value in the other information that I want to share. I want to revisit something called the energy pyramid. If those of you have attended previous webinars, you maybe have seen this. But what I want to do is just make sure that everybody's aware of it, because it's really a powerful tool for considering these the changes you're going to make to your buildings as you do renewals and make improvements. I want to talk about the utility data information that's there that could be helpful in your decision making. Talk about some topics like weather normalization and M&V. I want to expose you to those things in some future webinars. I want to do a deeper dive into those. So those of you that are interested in learning more about weather normalization and MV, I just want to try to satisfy your need for that. Talk about real-time data, also another great tool for learning about your buildings. And as we near the end, I want to talk more about condition assessments of your buildings, just strategies and things you might consider as you go understand more about your buildings. And as we get near the end, I just want to finish with a nice script, tell you what I think you might do in order to sequence things, in order to put together the best plan possible, in order to have the most success as you try to improve your facilities. All right, so let's start with the challenges. Let's talk about why this has been so hard for people to do over the course of time. Probably number one on the list is fluctuating budgets. It's very difficult to put together long-term plans if you don't know how much money you have. Most of you on the call, I'm guessing, are probably managing a few different budgets. You might have a capital budget, and then you might also simultaneously have your operational budget. The numbers might fluctuate up and down. Money's there one year, it's gone the next, and it's really hard to plan. So you have to certainly be aware of that. A thing that I've seen also cause major problems in the industry is leadership changes. Boy, it seems so common anymore what happens with leadership teams, whether it's at a university or school district or really any organization. What happens is the leadership team is there for 2 years or 3 years, and by the time you start working through and start to change facilities and have a vision in place, all of a sudden you have a new leadership team that comes in and gives you a different vision. And boy, that's hard to adjust midstream. So the priorities shift. You're understaffed, so you're trying to piece this all together with not enough people. Getting access to all the right data many times becomes a challenge as well, because there's expenses with getting the software, the tools you need maybe to get all the right data. Again, not enough resources. And I know I've heard from some of you that you chase grants. There are grants there one year and you want to capture the opportunity to get some money, whether they're grants or rebates. And so you chase it and things disappear. You plan on it, you count on those things. And like I say, they disappear over time. So all those make this very difficult. And I'm sure there's other things that I haven't included as well. It just simply means as you go into this, as you think about long-term plans for your facilities, you have to really put together a strong plan if it's going to survive the test of time and really meet your needs when you're done. So as I mentioned a minute ago, this is the energy pyramid. And a webinar that I did several weeks ago, I brought this up. So a quick review, and for those people that haven't seen this before, the energy pyramid is a philosophy for moving through facility improvement over the course of time. And like you might imagine, the pyramid is built on a strong foundation of energy information. And I really recommend that the information that you gather and pull together and utilize be used regularly in making these decisions. In previous webinars, I really focused on the idea of doing good, strong utility auditing and energy conservation. We had a whole webinar that really focused on strategies for energy conservation. But today's webinar is near the top of the pyramid. What I want to talk about today is energy efficiency and renewable energy. The concept in short is once you get all of your information together, you should do some low-cost things in the beginning by auditing bills and implementing culture change and energy conservation. And when you're ready, then start to focus on your utility, or I should say, focus on your facilities by doing projects that increase energy efficiency. And you might find it surprising at the top of the pyramid is renewable energy. Some people are excited to get to the top of the pyramid, but you'll see in the next couple of slides why I think you have to be patient and blend that into your process when the timing is right and not just jump to the top of the pyramid. So let's start taking a look at some data. I came up with a couple examples here that I think might be valuable. I wanted to highlight why it's important to consider your utility data when making some of these changes. So this is crude. I recognize it's it's made up information, but it's more the concept that I'm trying to share about what is out there. And if you look for it in your data, you're likely to find it. So I want to do a comparison between two buildings, a building A and a building B. So let's suppose building A is a high energy consumer, but it's inefficient. It's more recently renovated. It's a popular building that's on your campus. And it really isn't on your radar because let's say it's been fixed up in the last couple of years. You think, wow, that probably is a building that's a low-cost building because it's newer. It has new mechanical systems, and everything about it suggests, hey, it's winning the race. It's doing well. But if you really dig into the data, you might find that its electrical costs, its gas costs, water costs might come to a much higher total than a building like Building B that's a low energy consumer, but it's efficient. It's older and it desperately needs updated systems. And it's a good target for improvement work because it's older. But this building uses much less electricity, gas, and water. And so when you do a comparison between the two, the one building costs you $75,000 more per year. And let's also assume for this made-up example that the buildings are comparable in size. The big difference between the buildings is the efficiency part of it. And what I want to bring to your attention, if you haven't considered this in the past, is the cost of delaying fixing the building. That if you put off fixing that building, it could have a financial impact of $75,000 a year for 5 years. It could cost you $375,000 if you don't prioritize fixing the building, or if you just simply jump into fixing building B, and like I say, you ignore building A. So don't assume because a building is newer that it's more efficient than an older building. You really have to unpack the data. And one of the themes that you'll see over the course of this webinar, I believe the best long-term building improvements, what you have to do is have short-term plans and long-term plans. This might be a situation when you identify this on your campus where you sink some operational money into fixing building A in the short term so that you can focus your capital dollars on building B. Jumping into another example. And this highlights in the energy pyramid why renewable energy is at the top of the pyramid. So in this scenario, we have two buildings once again. And let's say building A, they just completed a massive solar array plan. They just added on a whole bunch of renewable energy on site. However, there was no energy conservation efforts implemented before the PV installation. As a result, it's got a high load, it's got a high annual consumption, and they had to build a solar array that met those needs because, once again, there was no effort made to try to reduce the load or reduce the consumption. But by comparison, a second building, let's say a concerted effort was put in to reduce energy consumption and manage demand before the PV installation. What they did in this scenario is maybe they completed a very focused building automation system retro commissioning project and executed some quick ROI projects. So the two buildings were identified. One building was identified as really having the opportunity to be tightened up. People spent some time, a year, implementing some change. And then you come out the other side, and now that the building is using less energy, you built a much smaller solar array. And maybe it made sense at that point to include a battery storage system as well to further reduce the load. I think you can see in this situation, if these two buildings were the same or very similar, because you built a much smaller solar array, there was a much smaller capital cost with that. And so the renewable energy project matched the building utilization and significantly reduced the capital expense. This is my point in the energy pyramid, why renewable energy has to be at the top. If you jump into these renewable energy projects before doing other things in the buildings, many times you're oversized and you're spending money that just you don't get the maximum benefit from. So consider that as you're planning projects. Other things that I'd like to highlight with regard to the data is I think it's really important as you get your utility data organized and collected, you have to look at trend history. I provided this chart over here as a simple benchmarking chart to take a look at cost per day so that you can find the energy hogs. You can find the buildings that are using a lot of energy. Don't assume, though, that an energy hog is necessarily an inefficient building. You have to consider how the building is being utilized. If buildings have a lot of activities going on, whether they're manufacturing activities or maybe there's science research activities on a university campus, they might have systems that have to run 24/7 and whereby consume a lot of energy. So just looking at UEI or looking at benchmarking metrics does not tell the whole story. You have to look beyond that. You have to understand truly how the building is being utilized so you can do some fair comparisons. One of the bullets at the bottom of my list here is I'm suggesting analyze and benchmark your buildings against one another by comparing their HVAC systems. Many times buildings with heat pumps, just due to the nature of the way they're designed, buildings have similar uses. Because they have the heat pumps and they have similar uses, it becomes a scenario where you can do a better job of comparing how they're performing. And so do that. Find the heat pump building that's performing poorly relative to its peers. Compare the buildings that have rooftops or buildings that are all on a chiller plant, or suppose you have a system that feeds the entire campus. Look at different scenarios, benchmark your buildings in different ways, and really scrub the data to analyze and find where the opportunities lie. Other things that I would suggest is evaluate work orders. Many times with buildings, if there's a lot of work orders coming from a building, which suggests that people are uncomfortable and unsatisfied with their workspace, many times those buildings have a lot of mechanical problems that are associated with them, which means they're better candidates for improvement over time. But once again, don't assume that the best solution for those is to slot them into a capital project plan to solve the problems. Sometimes it's better to evaluate them and have a short-term solution that might involve operational dollars to get them more efficient, get them more comfortable, so you can buy some time in order to do your capital improvements. All of this you should consider with some ROI calculations. You'll see in some future slides here. I want to give you some ammunition for doing some ROI calculations and show you some ways to slice and dice the data so you can do a better job of sorting and putting your buildings in a priority order. So now let's talk a little bit about weather normalization. So if you're unfamiliar with this, this is the idea of weather normalization. Buildings use energy, yes, and the weather can influence how much energy they use. So the process of weather normalization is for you to filter out the weather impact on the building. So what happens in doing this calculation is you figure out how much energy the building would be using, whether it's warm out, cold out, irregardless of weather, you would determine how much energy the building would be using, and the weather component then get layered on top of that. So you're disaggregating the data. And if you haven't seen, these charts over here on the right-hand side are just the regression analysis. I wanted to give you a feeling of a chart if you haven't seen this before, but this is how the calculation is done. It's a comparison between use and the heating or cooling degree days. And once again, I'll come back to this information in a future webinar for those of you that really want to learn more about weather normalization. But the idea is the weather compared to the use gives you a good comparison for many buildings. And through doing some statistics and analysis, you can find out how much weather affects a building. Another topic that for many people they don't quite have a clear understanding of that I think blends into this overall conversation is the idea of measurement and verification. Measurement and verification is this idea that there needs to be a tool, a way to compare buildings in an acceptable manner where people would agree on the calculations in order for you to determine what legitimate savings are. So over in the box to the right here, the purpose of MMV is to provide confidence to the interested parties that reported results are credible, including appropriate accuracy and measurement of uncertainty. Just giving you a little bit of a nugget now, and once again, I'm going to circle back to this in future webinars. The idea is that the people that are interested in doing calculations need to come together and put together an M&V plan. The M&V plan needs to be agreed on by both parties, and it could look different. Some people need to invest a lot of money and put a lot of effort into having a very rigorous M&V plan because it's important to the overall process, or it's important to the parties involved. Other people could have a very simple M&V plan that's very low cost. So this organization, EVO, and the principles behind the IPMVP state that if all parties involved agree to the plan, then it's a legitimate, viable plan. But the plan has to match the circumstances, and it has to match financially with what makes sense for the organization. So know that M&V is important in the process, and maybe it's helpful to you as you're looking at your buildings, and maybe it's one of those things you can bypass, but you should at least be aware of it in doing this building improvement. Jumping into another topic of cost avoidance. A lot of people talk about savings or they talk about cost avoidance. I wanted to give a clear understanding of what cost avoidance is and also reiterate some of these ideas of weather normalization and give you hopefully a helpful chart over here on the right-hand side. So what cost avoidance is a comparison for how a building's performing before and after an event. So this is the concept. The first thing you have to do is establish a fair baseline. So in my chart over here on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll notice that we've got a bar that shows consumption and it shows weather. Over here on the left-hand side, it shows energy use. So this bar is intending to show you could take a look at a baseline period of time, and that baseline period could be a day, could be a month, it could be a year, depending upon what you're analyzing. Usually, people create baselines based on a year of time. So this particular dark blue part of the bar suggests the consumption that took place in that particular facility or on that particular meter over a period of time. And that's consumption that would occur regardless of what the weather was like. The light blue part of the bar represents how much consumption was related to weather, meaning that if the weather was less severe, this light blue part of the bar would be smaller. Or if it was more severe, the light blue part of the bar would be greater. It helps you to clearly understand in the facility on this meter where the consumption is going. Is it related to weather or isn't it? Well, you can't just take last year's information and begin to compare it to this year's without making it match this year's circumstance. So in doing these calculations of cost avoidance, what you have to do is translate the baseline condition into today's conditions. So in the situation where the dark blue part of the bar became bigger, one reasonable explanation for this was in the baseline conditions. Let's say you had a 28-day month that you started to disaggregate. This year, now you have a 30-day month that you're looking at. So you'd expect to have more consumption because you have a longer billing cycle. If you notice the weather part of the bar, I'm not sure why that jumped around there, but if you notice the weather part of the bar is much smaller. And what you can learn from that is the bigger weather suggests it was more severe. The smaller weather suggests that it's less severe this year. So to summarize those two different bars, the first you had a tighter billing period and you had more severe weather. The year that you're interested in comparing had a longer billing period, but the weather was less severe. So now that's what the software is suggesting you should be using. The third bar over here is what actually took place. So this purple bar now represents how much consumption actually took place. And once again, the weather is layered in based on this year's circumstances. So in the situation where that happens, it gives you the ability to take a look at savings. So the principle of cost avoidance is you have to take a look at a baseline period of time, adjust for the circumstances that things might change, and then compare back to what actually took place in order to determine if there was savings or not. Now, why this is important is it really allows you to look at your projects and determine a return on investment, because all financial people want to see the value in the money they're spending, and this is a very powerful tool for helping you to do that. So if you're not familiar with cost avoidance or haven't been exposed to it before now, take a look. There's different software programs out there that can help you do this, but I think it's a critical part of really planning, because if you have those return on investment numbers, you can empower decisions to be made and get more of your projects done. This is just another way of looking at cost avoidance. This chart is simply spread out over time. So in this picture over here to the left, it represents a year of time, let's say. And then you have the baseline in blue. And notice those two different charts are similar, but not identical. Because the more baseline, or I misspoke there, the more data you have to tell the story, it legitimizes all of the data. And you can select a baseline period of time that best represents what's normal. The next window in this chart is an energy conservation measure was added. Something changed about the buildings. Maybe you changed lighting, maybe you changed mechanical systems, but some event took place. And as you track the building, the blue line moving across the chart is suggesting the actual usage. And the orange dotted line above here is suggesting what you would have used had you not done the energy conservation measure. So the gap between the orange and the blue represents the avoided energy. And then you can quantify that and determine the fair value of that energy. That is what cost avoidance is and energy avoidance is, pictorially. Okay, so cost avoidance, a real big part of this, I think that you really have to blend into your process. Now, I've stated a couple of times as we've talked about this, that I think you have to look at building improvement in a couple different ways. I don't think you can just put everything on paper and put together a plan that isn't adaptable. I think you have to identify things that are immediate problems and that need to be solved, because you're being killed with operational dollar spends. Your utilities are getting destroyed because the buildings just are broken. There are things wrong with them that could be relatively easily fixed. And so I just want to teach those who don't know and just remind those that are in the middle of this, a performance contract might be the best solution for this situation. If you haven't been exposed to performance contracts, the idea is this: the energy savings pays for the improvement that occurs in the facilities. So the idea is that this is a budget neutral event. It comes with guaranteed savings. There are many reputable companies out there that do this, where they will design and they'll do the implementation. It includes the M&V, so you can see that it's legitimate and it's truly helping you accomplish your goals. And the goal is to reduce your costs and improve efficiency. So let's just suppose you are thinking about a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. You've got all these buildings that you want to change and modify and improve, but you know you have some clunkers. Looking at a performance contract may be the best way to get some of those buildings whipped into shape and buy you some time in order for you to finish some of those other big building projects. Key thing, once again, is to buy yourself some time. Don't recognize that it's going to take long periods of time to get all this work done. And so just do it in the best way. And a performance contract may be a good alternative. Wanted to talk about some more data. I've got a couple slides, the next 4 slides. I want to talk about some real-time data. So I've got some pictures and I need to explain them a little bit just so you can appreciate what's here. And my point with looking at this type of data, first of all, for those that haven't been exposed to it, that you're aware that it's out there. And hopefully those that have seen it, you begin to see the power of this and all the ways that it could be helpful. So let's take a look at this first chart here. So what you're looking at is a day of time. So this represents a 24-hour period of time. The green area that goes across the diagram represents, in this particular software, it represents essentially the average use, or what the software would predict would be normal over a 24-hour period. And the black line that sharply goes through here represents what actually happened. So in most of the instances, as the black line was moving along, you could see that it was right on target. It was right where it was supposed to be. It was in the middle of what was expected. But now all of a sudden it's spiked out of here. It got to a point, and it just so happens this blue window of time represents on-peak charges for a utility charge. This event now has triggered much higher on-peak charges if this is an electric meter. And so this may be an event that happens one time, or it may be an event that's happening consistently, but the software is what helps you identify it so that you can react to it. And so take a look at this data. And again, this is a good example of where you could get hurt with a big spike, and it could hurt you on your electric meter. A second example is a period of time that's multiple days. And if you look at the dates here, it's in December. So this would be right around the Christmas holiday. So what's captured here, once again, is the green area going across the diagram represents what you should expect to use or what was used in years past. In this particular situation, what the client did is they wanted to make changes in their buildings. They wanted to power things down. They wanted to set things back over the holiday period of time. So as we were building towards the Christmas holiday, the usage was very normal. It was staying right within the green. And now the buildings were set back over a period of time, and the black line flattens out. What this affords you the ability to do is do the comparison between what was expected and what happened to quantify how much money could be saved by setting the buildings back. Another very valuable tool for this real-time data. Here's another great example. In this situation here, what you're looking at is it's a different chart, and this is showing a 7-day week. So what we've got here is we've got these humps. So this would represent a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday, and then you've got Saturday and Sunday, which this is suggesting the buildings are turning off because this data is kWh data. Okay, should have probably said that up front. So we're looking at the usage, the kWh consumption of a building. This suggests that there's no humps on Saturday and Sunday. And once again, the building turns on and runs on a Monday and Tuesday. Well, you might say, well, kind of what does that tell you? Well, what it can tell you, and there are some numbers down here. What this is showing you is this software gives you the ability to determine how much energy was used over this window of time. And if you notice down here, it's about 21,000 units of energy. It also tells you how much was used when the building was on schedule. And the scheduled part is the blue part, these blue bars. So what this is essentially saying, and for easy math, we're saying that we used about 10,000 units of energy when the building was being scheduled. Well, you've got 5 humps, 10,000 units, so 10,000 divided by 5. Each one of these humps represents 2,000 units of energy. And if you simply multiply that by your electrical rate, you can get the value of each one of these occupied periods of time. Likewise, it gives you the usage during off-schedule time. It would essentially be the usage going flat across here. It would be the base usage of the building. It represents how much the energy the building is using when nobody's in it. Since this number is roughly 11,500 and you have 7 days, what that implies is you're going to be using 1,500 units of energy, whether people are in your building or not. Once again, my point for sharing this information is very powerful when determining ROI costs. You need to know how much it costs to turn the building on, because if you're going to make changes, the financial person's going to want to know what's the benefit in order to justify the changes. A last example for this interval data, I wanted to make sure you understood this isn't just electrical data. Real-time data could occur on water meters as well. And so that's what this is here. This represents a water meter. And in the beginning here, over the course of days, if you notice these little ticks represents days, you notice that the usage in the water meter is very flat. And then it goes up and it seems to go through its pattern. But as the days go by, we never return to zero. Initially, this green line showing usage is right at 0, but as the days tick off the calendar, we never return to 0. This data would suggest that something very likely broke or a leak was sprung. And so it would hopefully be a red flag for somebody and say, we got to get out and take a look at this data is very good in real time, but by having this data, it's even good at identifying for when events took place. Usually people are not out checking to make sure their water meters are functioning properly. There's the assumption that things are always right. Having this data and having somebody proactively look at it would help you to respond quicker. But even if you can't catch it, you at least can go back in time and find out when it happened. And if you haven't heard this before, my experience working with water companies around the country is they will forgive one water leak every couple years. And so if you can justify this, explain this, and use the data, it might empower you to have a better conversation with your utility provider, because sometimes, as I say, they forgive these water leaks and could end up being a lot of money. So real-time data, what are some of the benefits? Well, we're all aware of how AI is beginning to affect our world. And a lot of the software programs that are out now are starting to use AI intelligence or trend insights in order to find what's supposed to happen and compare that to what is happening. So become aware of that, learn about that, start talking to some of the vendors out there, because I think you're going to find there's some really good solutions. But the real-time data really does help you to identify the right short-term plan and solutions. It also, the AI tools are starting to do predictive analytics, so they're able to predict when future failures are likely to occur. If you track heat signatures on pumps or motors or air handling units, some of the software is getting very sophisticated, and so you can anticipate that 100 horsepower pump you have that's pushing a lot of chilled water and replace it proactively before it actually fails. This software is great for identifying high base loads and load factors, things in the building that might trigger work or contracts, short-term contracts with vendors in order to get things repaired. This opens up the possibility of demand management strategies, peak shaving, and moving loads to different periods of time. Maybe it will suggest that you should look at battery storage as a possible building improvement. You can also verify building operation, and it allows you to remotely audit your buildings. If somebody has the position and the time where they can look at this data, they can confirm buildings are running the way they're supposed to. As we've said, you can identify leaks and find out other opportunities. And I think maybe the theme of all of this, which is so powerful, is it's data that allows you to do ROI analysis. So don't disregard real-time data. There's some really good information here that you could benefit from. Another thing I ran into in my travels around the country is some utility companies will provide electric rate structures in the form of a spreadsheet. So let me explain that a little bit. So I was working with a client and they wanted to make changes to their buildings, or they wanted to run different scenarios, load scenarios, or energy usage scenarios. And some of the clients I was working with were even doing building changes. They were considering different building systems, heat pumps, or they were looking at chill water systems or rooftops. And each of those things are going to produce different rates associated with them. They're going to have different loads. If you can get your hands on these utility provided spreadsheets, it allows you to mock up different scenarios. So if you want to consider buildings with more energy consumption but lower loads, or vice versa, these will allow you to find out exactly what you would be paying in future scenarios. Another thing, if you're unaware of this, is if you were to go back 20 years in time, many electric providers were really charging most for energy use and very little for load. That's changed over the course of 20 years that I've been in the industry. Now, most of the electrical rate codes, really, you're paying more for load than you are for energy use. But based on the size of the building and the utilization of the building, you need to do your homework on this, particularly if you're doing a lot of building improvement or you're really wanting to understand the benefits of spending some money in the short term in order to fix some things. These spreadsheets, once again, that come from the vendor could be a really useful tool for understanding the benefits to you in your organization. During this process, and maybe let me step back a little bit, is as we've been talking over the course of the last half hour, I've tried to say data is important. You got to start at the bottom of the energy pyramid, work your way up, use that data, start to do culture changes, and then start to focus on the facilities and ending with renewables. But as you're working through this process, you also have to start to accumulate additional data. And so if you don't have one, You need to get a capital asset management system somewhere that you can start to put all this information. You need to take a look at your deferred maintenance issues. And I went to a conference recently and somebody refused to say critical deferred maintenance. And I really liked his justification. He was saying that he doesn't like deferred maintenance because it gives the opinion, or it suggests to people that it's really not, that important, or it's just kind of delayed. He suggests using capital renewable and replacement. You have to help people to understand that this is significant, that people might see deferred maintenance as a minor operational thing. This is a very significant thing, and it's even more significant as years go by. Many organizations, they put off doing work on things, and so you have to really get your mind around the state of your facilities. If you don't have it, you need to make sure you have a good inventory of all of your equipment. You need to make sure you're reviewing your work order system. And another source of information that people disregard is many times the building automation systems, you can run reports and do analysis. And so if you have a savvy BAS guy, have them dig into the system and run some reports to find out what things are not working properly. Get your mind around the real functionality of your system so you can budget and plan around it. Maybe it's a higher priority for future repairs. You don't even realize it. Again, it's one of those things that gets ignored because we're all so busy. Wanted to make you aware of something else as well. ASHRAE. ASHRAE produces a life cycle chart, or an equipment life cycle expectancy chart. And I just got it here on the screen just to give you a flavor of what it is. What ASHRAE is trying to do to help us all out is to give us a sense for how long things are going to last. So you might see up here at the top, air-cooled condensers. They're saying the median age is 20 years. Or you take pumps, base mounted pumps, they might last for 20 years. This is great information. And I think Madigan has put the PDF or a link to the PDF in the chat. So if you want to download this, please go ahead and do that. And I also asked Madigan to put this link into the chat. This links you back to ASHRAE. And the value of this is ASHRAE is looking for information from you so they can provide you better information. ASHRAE is looking to grow their database of information, so there are some links there for you to leave information as well as for you to take information, so we all have better information to go from. But another part of this process, I think you really have to compare the age of your equipment with what the suggested age is. And if we're unaware of a tool like this, I think this also empowers you in talking to people that are less familiar with these things. You can fight for money more easily when you can say, hey, our stuff is 30 years old, and this chart here says it's got a 20-year life cycle. So use this information to win more money. Another plug I wanted to put in here is this idea that I have, for the people that get to know me, I'm a strong proponent of energy conservation, and people recognize that. And I want to explain yet another reason why I think it's important. If you implement strong energy conservation strategies, it means your equipment is running less time day by day by day. So let's suppose you have a pump that's running 12 hours a day right now, and it only needs to run 10 hours a day. Well, by implementing an energy conservation strategy and getting that pump to run 2 hours less every single day, think about how it extends the life of the pump. That pump might be rated to run for 2,000 hours in its life or 5,000 hours. So it's saving 2 hours a day, every day, day after day. You are extending the life of that particular pump. So if you haven't thought about that, think about that relative to a chart like this. Even though something's rated to run for 20 years, or that's its median life cycle, maybe you're able to stretch it out to 24 or 26. Again, the push is for getting it turned off day by day and doing more energy conservation. So as you're going through this long process of building improvements, at some stage you have to consider facility condition assessments. And I just want to talk about these a little bit. So there are many companies out there that do these for you. And usually they work under the structure that they're considering pieces of equipment in the facilities that are aged and ready for replacement. And what they look at is replacing like for like. So if it's a heat pump building, you're going to keep it a heat pump building. You're just replacing the old heat pumps with new heat pumps. And so it might be time to reconsider those things. Make sure as you find the right vendor, the right partner to do this for you, if you know you've got an inefficient building and it is heat pumps, but you think you could be more efficient by moving to something different, this is the time. Consider that. Make sure that they're aware of that. Another recommendation I'd have is conduct a pilot to right-size your assessments. These companies many times can do whatever you ask them to do, from finding all the little details to just giving you the high-level overview. So make sure you right-size your facility condition assessments to match what your goals are. And once you go through a pilot or two, then I would say let's just do rinse and repeat. Then you can repeat it over the course of all of your other buildings. I'd also get you to think about, are you focusing on the shell, the cosmetic parts of the building, or maybe it's the critical MEP? We all recognize the importance of the mechanical systems, the electrical systems, the plumbing systems. Those things are critical, right? They have to be part of looking at these building improvements. And so you have to consider where these are on the priority list relative to the shell or the cosmetic things. These companies that do this work will include recommendations. So take a look at those and see if it matches your priorities. But let the data tell the story. Make sure that you're looking at what they bring back and consider as you're looking at the options moving forward. So now as this builds over the course of years of time, as you're doing this work and working hard to get all this stuff done, now I'm saying you got to refine the plan. You've got to consider all of your organizational priorities and make sure they align with what you're trying to get done. My suggestion is you have to create a matrix or a metric. You have to work with other people in your organization and consider all the variables that are important in terms of maybe building usage and priorities from leadership. Take a look at the age of the equipment, list all the variables, all the things that are important, and come up with a scale so that you can rate them building by building in order to prioritize the building. Other considerations at this stage is, where does resiliency fit into your plan? There's a lot more pressure on organizations now to look at resiliency as part of their plan. Well, are you ready for that? Do you have the money to do that? This is the time when you should consider it. Something that gets neglected are underground utilities. People forget about those. And so you can't ignore those. Those facility condition assessments many times don't include those things. So don't overlook that, budget for that, think about that. And then try to anticipate things. Well, what's the cost of waiting? Think about the tariffs in our world, what's happening with tariffs now, inflation, how is that going to affect these decisions? So consider too, what you have for the HVAC type. One of the things that I've seen in buildings moving around the country is you're really constrained how you can operate a building based on its HVAC type. Let's suppose you have a really big building and there are periods of time where there aren't a lot of people in the building and they're all in one area. And let's also suppose in this scenario that it's a building with a chiller, where when you turn the chiller on, the chiller essentially is trying to serve the whole building, and the building is designed to have a load on it. But yet, if people are only in one part of the building when the chiller is running, there might not be enough load in order to keep those people comfortable. And my supposition here, or my statement is, as you consider your buildings and how you manage them, also think about how you design them. If you have a building where you know you're going to have people in only one part of the building, you might choose, in this example I'm talking about that has a chiller, maybe in one quadrant of the building or one area of the building, you put in a rooftop unit. Maybe the chiller and the piping only runs through 3/4 of the building, and the last quarter of the building is a rooftop unit or two, because you know you can control it independent for energy conservation reasons, and you also will get more comfort because the rooftop units will be working the way they're designed, rather than a chiller system trying to serve a building that's got very few occupants in it. So consider, as you do your building upgrades, it might be time to consider different HVAC systems and consider building utilization as part of your plan. Ignoring those things is very likely going to increase inefficiency down the road. So what's the role of renewables or battery storage, thermal storage, photovoltaic? Again, all of those things have to be considered. And I just take you back to where the presentation began today. Think about the energy pyramid. Look at those things when you're ready. Don't jump to the top of the pyramid, because I don't think you're going to get the bang for your buck the way you hope you will. And another big topic in today's industry is electrification. Are you ready for electrification? Is your area of the country ready for electrification? A future webinar that I want to explore is electrification and the grid and how it's expected to change in the next 10 years. I think you're going to be shocked to learn the challenges associated with that and the forecast for that. And so as you plan this, don't just assume electrification is the answer. I think there's more there that you need to learn about. And we'll revisit that, like I say, in a future webinar. Another thing that I'm particularly passionate about is I suggest that you consider your team and your resources when doing all of this work. One of the very common instances that I've seen over the course of time is people get excited about new technology. Every organization is strapped for money, and every organization is understaffed. It's a very common theme. Also, another thing that's happening is many organizations are seeing their maintenance and facilities teams getting older and older. And as a consequence of that is people that have been in the industry for a period of time typically are less comfortable working on more sophisticated equipment. And so in order for them to do their jobs well, they need training and they need support. But sometimes organizations don't allocate the money and the budgets in order to do that. So my message, and this is something, again, I want to reiterate, I'm very passionate about because I've seen it just go so wrong so many times. Whatever an organization chooses to do, your building design and your operation needs to match. And what I mean by that is if you're going to build buildings that are sophisticated, the systems have sensors and all sorts of fancy technology, the organization also needs to allocate the money to train the people that are being asked to maintain it and run it and fix it. Because when you buy a big fancy building, it might work well for a year, but at some point things are going to break and it's going to need to be fixed. And that organization needs to make sure they have the people that can do that. So just simply make sure it matches. If you've got the resources, go for it. Spend the money, get things that are more sophisticated. But if you know those resources are tough or money is going to be hard to find for training, then I would advise you to build things that are less sophisticated because you're going to have more success over the course of time. Your buildings will be more efficient. And quite frankly, you're going to be happier because you're not going to be dealing with temperature complaints and such. Okay, as we wind down a couple more slides, I want to talk a little about some of the assets you need or some of the things that I would recommend that you explore. Get out there and try to find some vendors. You definitely need utility tracking software in order to do this well. I think you need some HVAC management solutions. You need some real-time data analysis tools. You should be hopefully tracking all of your work orders within some type of electronic system. I'd advise you to get a space utilization or scheduling software program that can be shared across an organization. And project management software, just some type of tools. I think all of these in today's age are just critical to your overall success. I think if you ignore these steps and you try to do it in a more of a traditional way, you're going to find you're fighting an uphill battle. And so I wanted to ask the question, how many of you out there are actually using a full suite of software? And my intention with asking this question is not necessarily to bias for any one vendor or not. It's just, have you found the benefit of using these tools? And I'd love to get feedback from you now with this poll question is, are you currently using some type of software to track your data and work orders and all those types of things? Or are you struggling to get that because of budgets? So if you could just take a second and respond in the poll here, just so others can see as well.
And I'm seeing some yeses in the
Yeah. And this, what appears to be about a 3/4, 1/4 split is what it looks like we're headed to. This is what I would expect. And again, this is anticipated, this is normal. But if you're a leader and you're either new to this, you're trying to get better at this, or you just recognize there's value, this is the time too. I want to go back to my comment early on in the webinar is if you have suggestions, if you have found a vendor, you found a software that you really, really like, you might drop it in the chat right now, just so people have something to go off of with one of these systems. But this hopefully is becoming more of a standard practice in our industry. But I think it's been a struggle for financial reasons. And also people may be comfortable with what they've had. But I guess I'm trying to push you out of your comfort zone a little bit and suggest that maybe there's some things out there that could really make your job easier. Okay, so just some final thoughts as we wrap up here is, and I've become a broken record if you've seen these webinars over the course of the last couple months, prioritize your utility data. Make sure you build a good team around you. You need to get a handful of people. Hopefully you're not in this flying solo. Get some people around you that have the same mission as you. You coach them, you train them, you teach them, you build that strong team so you can work collaboratively to figure this out. Convince your leadership to focus on long-term savings. That's been the theme of this webinar, is you have to do this strategically. It's not about the quick short-term wins. It's about doing this methodically and strategically over the course of time in order for you to win the game. Work on that energy conservation culture, gather information, analyze your data, find good partners. Make sure that you work collaboratively with your good partners. And my recommendation is that you find a limited number of partners, because I think the fewer partners you have that can serve all your needs, I think it really helps you to stay on track. I think the more partners you have, it just complicates relationships. So I'm not biasing you against any one vendor or anything like that. I just want to make sure you realize I think there's a benefit with having fewer. I think you win the game over time. Consider both the short-term and long-term benefits of this. And the last critical thing, kind of the crescendo of this whole discussion today, I think you need to have some type of written document which captures this information. And why I say that is back to the challenges of leadership changes. I think it's really important that this gets on paper, because if you leave or your leader, your CEO leaves, somebody needs to pick up the pieces as people transition in and out. If an organization is going to do this strategically and the best they can, there has to be an established plan that can be executed by whoever is behind the wheel. And so make sure that some type of written document exists so it can be used over the course of time. Okay, so I think we've got a handful of minutes left. Love to answer any questions you might have, or if somebody wants to weigh in and give some feedback. And I think we also wanted to, Madigan, we wanted to make sure everybody knew that Dylan Reedy was available here as well.
Yeah, so I want to take a second to introduce Dylan. He is one of our account executives here at EnergyCAP. He is calling in from California. Dylan, if you want to, introduce yourself a little bit.
Hey everyone, I more so just had questions for Tom in regards to the presentation. So the first one was, Tom, in your experience when working with performance contractors, can you really verify savings produced without weather data? Is that deemed accurate or accurate enough if you're not weather normalizing the data set?
Dylan, it's a little bit of a loaded question. If you agree to it, you can. Many times in the MNV, I mentioned over the course of the webinar that both parties involved in a contractual relationship can agree to the rules they think are right and fair. I tend to think that weather is important, and so I think it should be included in the calculation. But if everybody is knowledgeable of what the results are by not including weather and they agree to it, then it's okay. But I would strongly encourage people to include weather.
And then have you seen consultants using their own software, or is it usually comes down to whoever purchases the contract to verify the savings?
Yeah. Many times the most common thing is the performance contracting companies will bring in their own software, which is maybe necessary. But I think that sets itself up for something that could be contentious over time. If, let's suppose, the performance contract struggles a little bit to meet its goals, and we're using software that's brought in by the company doing the work, it's more like they're keeping their own score sheet. And so it brings some uncertainty into the accuracy of the information. I think it might be wise, particularly if you have massive performance contracts, to have a redundant piece of software used to verify savings and empower the organization to make sure they're getting what they paid for.
Interesting. And then another question that came up for me is, how often have you seen people use real-time data to verify what the utilities are charging them? Especially when the utilities are doing, they're not taking actual meter readings on site, they're doing estimates.
Yeah, Dylan, it's pretty rare. I mean, their real-time data actually, in some cases, can come right from the utility company themselves. And usually in those instances, you get really good data on your bills. In the cases where it doesn't, there is no doubt that there are some issues there. And I think my recommendation here is it's going to matter most on bigger buildings. And so with limited time and limited resources, I would stay focused on bigger facilities, because that's, if you find errors, you're going to see the benefit of those identifications more so than in smaller buildings. So stay focused on the big guys.
Yeah. So real-time data really helps you with things like scheduling, right? Making sure that things are going off during the holidays and things like that. When it comes to scheduling, how big of an impact can that have on organizations with savings? In your experience, really?
It's huge. It's huge. I've worked with organizations that have been running their mechanical system nearly around the clock, and some that have been, they've been conservative with their scheduling. and others that have been real aggressive. And there is no doubt, depending upon where an organization starts, it might be an opportunity to save 20% on their HVAC costs, just because of the scheduling is maybe not being aggressively pursued. You know, it might be a big opportunity for savings.
And then one thing that I hear when people don't want to pursue saving or scheduling aggressively is that they're worried about turning things back on and there being a demand spike when they do turn things
Yeah.
on.
Yeah,
Is that
there's a little bit of a, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a misnomer with that, or just education that needs to happen. Is that it really depends. First of all, a lot of buildings anymore have variable frequency drives. So as motors are ramped up and turned on, they're turned on in a soft way. For those who are not really in the industry that much, it's called a soft start. So they ramp up, so it avoids that peak. And another way to manage that, if there is the risk of that when there's financial punitive penalties, is just don't start everything at the same time. So let's say you have a building with 5 different HVAC zones. Hypothetically, let's start one at 6 a.m. Let's start the next one at 6:15 a.m. Let's start the next one at 6:30 a.m. Rather than making them all start at the same time, understand your buildings enough that you can vary things a little bit and turn them on at different times. And it also helps manage the peak loads.
Stagger it.
Yep.
Interesting. That's really all the questions that I have. I want to maybe open it up to the discussion. If anybody wants to put anything into the chat that they are curious about, feel free. But
Hey, Matt, again, I know we're tight for time too. Were there any other questions that came up that I can just respond to real quick? I know people are all busy. They're probably going to start going about their day.
I only see one from earlier right now. Someone asked if there's been any news from Energy Star, which is actually funny because we just published our blog that Tom worked on about if Energy Star, goes away, what is your plan? So we just posted that. I will put it in the chat, and you can also find it on our LinkedIn page. But yeah, right now that's the only question. If anyone has anything else, please feel free to drop it in the chat. But if you have other questions arise, feel free to, use Eco Champions. That resource is really, really beneficial. And yeah, you can always message Tom on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, please do. Okay, Matt, again, I know we're past the top of the hour now, so thank you everybody for joining. And I don't know that we have a date established for the next webinar just yet, but please keep your eyes open because there's more information to follow. And I wish I would have said this earlier. If you have any special requests about the topics you'd like me to explore more, I'm happy to do that. Please put that in the chat or email me. Part of what this is about is certainly meeting you where you're at, and so I want to make sure that I'm providing you information that's helpful to you.
Yes, and someone just asked to share the slides. We will be sharing the recording, so look for that in the coming days. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone have a great Memorial Day and a nice weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.